I want to start by just thanking my Republican colleague from Maine, Senator Susan Collins, for her work on this legislation, in addition to her excellent work on the Intelligence Committee. Her experience in Homeland Security and with critical infrastructure was absolutely critical to the drafting of this legislation. And with both of us as current members of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, we are continuing to work on the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. You know, our committee heard yesterday, we held an important open hearing where we had representatives from companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter. We know that Russian government-linked actors purchased online advertisements last year in order to influence voters and, frankly, in order to divide Americans. Additionally, Russia used bots and trolls to spread misinformation and division organically through social media networks. And while the president has labeled reports of these ads as a hoax, now that Facebook has actually released many of those ads and acknowledged their extensive reach last year, I hope that we can all agree that this is a problem that we must solve before future election cycles. I've called on the Federal Election Commission to consider new guidance on how online advertisement platforms can better prevent foreign nationals from illicitly spending in future U.S. elections. And I certainly support legislation to require the same sorts of transparency for online political ads that we currently enjoy for television or print or radio ads. These are simple, straightforward steps that we can and must take to protect the sanctity of our democracy. We also know that, based on intelligence assessments, that as part of Russia's larger hostile effort to interfere in last year's election, Russian actors targeted state election voting centers, state-level voting registration databases, the very heart of the infrastructure that we all rely on for free and fair elections. And these intrusions, in my view, demonstrate a troubling vulnerability to potential future cyber attacks and even manipulations by foreign hackers of our elections and our democratic process. Our democracy fundamentally hinges on protecting the rights of Americans to be able to fairly choose their own leaders. And that's why I'm proud to be partnering with Senator Collins to introduce the bipartisan Securing America's Voting Equipment Act, or SAVE Act, to provide increased security for American election systems. I'm proud to join Senator Collins on the floor today to demonstrate our commitment to being able to move forward in a bipartisan and pragmatic way to find solutions to protect the integrity of that voting process. Our bipartisan legislation would permanently designate state-run election systems as critical infrastructure. And it would require the Department of Homeland Security to create a federal grant program to help states upgrade the physical, the electronic, even the administrative components of their voting systems and develop those best practices that Senator Collins mentioned in her speech earlier. The SAVE Act would also require the Director of National Intelligence to sponsor security clearances to the officials responsible for the administration and certification of federal elections in each state, usually our secretaries of state. The Director of National Intelligence would then share all appropriate classified information with those state officials to help them protect their election systems from these kinds of security threats. And finally, the SAVE Act would create a federal competition that would award computer programmers who discover vulnerabilities in non-active voting systems so that the equipment and the software vendors can work to fix those vulnerabilities. The SAVE Act does not aim to tell states how to conduct their elections or what policies or procedures or equipment is best where they are. Rather, this bill is designed to facilitate the kind of information sharing with states and provide guidelines on how best to secure those systems. to allow states to access funds to develop those solutions and implement those best practices in response to these threats. I consulted closely with my own Secretary of State from New Mexico, Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver, in drafting this legislation to ensure that it provides the security measures that state election officials need to keep our voting system secure. And I commend Secretary Toulouse Oliver for her tremendous leadership in the effort to safeguard election infrastructure at the state level. We are at a critical juncture in the Russia investigation, in which the public is beginning to see the tactical evidence of how the Kremlin sought to influence our elections and divide our populace. Until we set up stronger protections of our election systems and take the necessary steps to prevent future foreign influence campaigns, our nation's democratic institutions will remain vulnerable. But we have the tools to fix those vulnerabilities, and I look forward to working with Senator Collins and all of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to ensure that we do that. Thank you, Mr. President.